Hey, I'm Kale, and today I am looking at Ram by Paul and Linda McCartney. Ram was released May of 1971 and is the second studio album by Paul McCartney. It's the first studio album released technically after the Beatles have broken up because McCartney 1 was released when the Beatles were still technically a band. In 1971, at this point, all of the Beatles had released solo albums already, and all of them were pretty highly critically acclaimed except for McCartney 1. And then Ram came out and it was also trashed. Like no one liked it at all. Critics just absolutely trashed it. And even though Paul McCartney is usually seen as having one of the best, if not the best Beatles solo career, in the first 3 years, he had objectively the worst. I'll get to on why I think that is more at the very end of this video, but yeah, just keep that in mind, I guess. Before I get into the recording section of this video, I should probably get into, say, the personnel of the album. Well, you have Paul McCartney on vocals, guitar, bass guitar, piano, keyboards. Linda McCartney on vocals and backing vocals and vocals and vocals and backing vocals. David Spinoza on guitar and Danny Sewell on drums. But yes, okay, now we can venture into the recording. Dedicated recording sessions for the album were held from early October to mid-March. October of 1970 and then March of 1971. I probably should have specified the year. It was mostly recorded in New York, but the end parts of the actual recording process and the mixing were done in Los Angeles. And this seems like it's going to be another very short recording part of the video, as there's nothing really remarkable about the actual recording of the album. Like McCartney 1, where it was like he recorded it in a home studio, so it's a little more interesting, but this, it was just kind of, yeah. So I guess with that absolute monster of a recording section, we can get into the track-by-track breakdown now. High five. Track 1 is Too Many People. Too Many People is basically just about the Beatles, specifically about John Lennon and Yoko Ono. And the song is more or less McCartney talking about how he's tired of people preaching random stuff that they're not gonna do and have no control over. In response, later in the year, John Lennon wrote How Do You Sleep, which was another diss track on Paul McCartney. Seems a little bit childish because McCartney kind of wrote this whole fleshed out song with lots of lyrical meaning, and then John Lennon's was like, you are bad, you are not good, you are a stinky guy. John Lennon claims it's not about Paul McCartney, but he also claims a lot of things that are not true. So it's also a bit of a return to psychedelic rock with Paul McCartney, especially towards the end of the song. It feels very Sgt. Pepper Magical Mystery Tour sort of. Next up is Three Legs. Three Legs is a Delta blues rock song, and it's about the Beatles, which is a shocker because every Beatles solo song in 1971 was about the Beatles somehow. The song uses a dog with 3 legs as a metaphor for how the band couldn't work with just 3 members and it had to have everyone together. Honestly, it's one of my favorite songs in the album, not lyrically or whatever, but just the sound of it. It's a American blues folk. Next up is Ram On. Ram On is just a little sort of ballad, I guess you could call it. It's not really a ballad, but and it's played entirely on ukulele. It's just Paul and his ukulele. Yeah. Apparently it was written when he was in a taxi in New York because he'd always bring his ukulele in taxis, and he always annoyed taxi drivers by singing in the taxi. That would be pretty annoying, I'm not gonna lie. I would kick Paul McCartney out of my taxi if he came in and just started going at it on his ukulele. I mean, not now, obviously, because he's Paul McCartney, but if I was just a normal taxi driver that didn't care about the Beatles or whatever, one person I would throw out of a cab at random is Steven Tyler. Yeah, you thought for a second I was gonna forget an Aerosmith joke, but no. Next up is Dear Boy. Now, Dear Boy is probably about Linda McCartney's ex-husband, but John Lennon, being John Lennon, had some other ideas. The song is basically structured as Paul telling the ex-husband that he is bad, that he is not good. And so John Lennon, being John Lennon in 1971, theorized that the song was actually about him, because of course he did. A very recurring theme in this video. It's gonna be John Lennon thinking a song on Ram is about him. And John Lennon absolutely trashed Ram when it came out. When Ram came out, he was like, yep, this is actually the worst album that's ever been put out, and I hope it gets burned. Like, you can't be trashing this album so hard and being like, yeah, actually all the songs are about me. So actually give me the money instead, because they're all about me. So that basically means I wrote them. John Lennon from 1968 to 1974 was human, for sure, maybe. The song musically is like an art pop, jazz pop thing. Yeah. Next up is Uncle Albert Admiral Halsey. The way Uncle Albert Admiral Halsey is structured, it's like a medley or a musical suite, much like the medley on Abbey Road. The song isn't really about anything. The name Uncle Albert is referring to Paul McCartney's uncle Albert, who he spent a lot of his childhood with in his like seaside house. So the first part of the song is more or less a nostalgic amalgamation. Not in a bad way, it's just what it is. And the name Admiral Halsey is a reference to Fleet Admiral William Halsey, who was the Fleet Admiral of the English Navy during World War II. So if anything, Uncle Albert Admiral Halsey is an homage to, like, 1940s England. And then next up is Smile Away. Smile Away flows in directly from Uncle Albert Admiral Halsey. Smile Away is honestly one of my favorite songs on the album. It's just like a White Album-esque, like, rock standard, and I'm a fan. And the bass track on Smile Away is layered over each other 8 times, so it's just the same bass line, but it's layered 8 times, so it's a loud bass line. I found another one. But yeah, Smile Away closes out side 1, and opening up side 2 is Heart of the Country. Heart of the Country was written almost immediately after the breakup of the Beatles, right when Paul McCartney bought a farm in Scotland, and it's kind of just like a peppy like folk country song. Really sounds like something that like 1966 to 1967 Graham Nash would write. It's oddly specific, but it's true. Next up is Monkberry Moon Delight. Monkberry Moon Delight is a spooky rock song. It should be an established genre at this point. I feel like there are a good handful of songs that I've covered on this channel that could classify as spooky rock. McCartney sings Monkberry Moon Delight in this gruff voice. He's imitating 40s and 50s singer Screamin' Jay Hawkins, who would actually cover the song a few years later in 1973. And the song is about drinking a magic milkshake. And that's not a euphemism for anything. It's just about wanting to drink a magic milkshake. So, I mean, that's fantastic. That's got to be top 10 things songs are about of all time. And I think this is the first pretty notable case of a song being really influential on indie rock, which was popularized in the mid to late 80s and is basically like very established genre now. And a lot of people consider this album to be the first indie rock album of all time. I will also get to that later in this video. Next up is Eat at Home. Eat at Home is like a peppy, another root rock song kind of based on like Buddy Holly. And there's this guitar riff that kind of flows throughout the song that kind of connects verses to verses and then verses to instrumental parts. And it's very progressive sounding. It sounds like something out of like a power pop song from like the late 70s, early 80s, or like even new wave even. The song is about how restaurants are bad and people should just eat at home and cook. And you can also hear a pretty big influence on indie rock in this song too. I think these last like 3, 4, 5 songs are like the real, like, reason why people think it's an indie album. And next up is Long Haired Lady. I think Long Haired Lady is just okay. It's honestly not my favorite song on the album. And I know that's the point of the song too, but it almost feels like, and it's just me, it almost spoils the song a little bit. And I mean, I get it. That was almost like the entire point of that part, but yeah. And I think Linda McCartney's vocals are fantastic on this album. I just think on this song in particular, they come off very, like, screamy and are a little bit annoying. Next up is Ram On Reprised. It's just Ram On, but 39 seconds long. There's nothing to say about it. Next up is Backseat in My Car, which is another song John Lennon claimed was about him. However, the song was not in fact about John Lennon. It was just about driving. And that's it. Driving. Not John Lennon, though. But yeah, that's Ram. Now let's go to my thoughts. My thoughts are that this is one of the most, like, openly influential albums I reviewed on the channel. If this album wasn't released, Indie Music Still would probably exist because it would just tie into the lo-fi genre, but I think it would sound very different and wouldn't really be rock per se. It would just be more like lo-fi, like a low fidelity, like made at home. And I was just making fun of Linda McCartney's vocals like a minute ago, but I think that her inclusion on the album and her like harmonies and stuff did kind of make the album like indie. I think it honestly did. And I said I was going to get to it earlier. I think the reason why this album was trashed so much by critics at first, and this goes the same as McCartney 1 too. I think the reason that critics hated McCartney 1 and Ram so much was because it literally sounded like nothing that had come out at the time. Like, McCartney 1 and Ram are truly just like, if you listen to them, like, maybe aside from Maybe I'm Amazed, honestly, they're like, they don't sound like anything else from like the 1968 to 1975 period. Like, if I didn't know any of these songs and I didn't know who Paul McCartney was and I didn't know what the Beatles were and whatever, and you told me that this album came out in like 2004 or 2005, I would be like, oh yeah, for sure, that sounds like an indie album from 2004. But yes, very influential album, very good album. I think that you should listen to it. But yeah, that's Ram. Also, 100 subscribers. That's pretty cool. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Anyway, goodbye, bozos.